is Chase London. I am one of the directors at the Board of Accounts over schools and townships. I've worked with the Board of Accounts for almost 7 years now. Started with state assignments, auditing the state CAFR, the A133, and then I moved up the office to assist townships and schools. And my partner is Jonathan Weiniger. You'll see him in the top right box there. He joined me a little over a year ago. And he's been a big help to me. If you remember, my prior partner is Ryan Preston, and I was going solo there for a while. So Jonathan has been a great help, and you can reach out to both of us if you have any questions. Also joining us is Debbie Gibson, our supervisor. She will probably answer any questions that we can't answer. So I'll just let her pipe in whenever she wants to. Is Paul on this call, Debbie?
He said he'd be popping in, so.
Okay, and we might have the state examiner, Paul Joyce, come as well and answer some questions. So with that, I think I'll just get started. Just introduced ourselves and wanted to remind you all that we are still open for business. We are willing to take calls, emails, and we're responding probably more quickly than we normally are because the questions are down with people working from home and schools being closed. But please call us if you have any questions, just normal questions or public health crisis questions. We don't discriminate. Our email is probably the best way to get a hold of us because if we're in conferences or things like that, like this, you may not get us, and they'll just leave a voice message for us to call you back. But schools.townships@sboa.in.gov is the best way to get a hold of us. So the three areas we're going to discuss today are some executive orders that were released by the governor, the memos that we have sent out, and so far there's been 4. I think there's going to be another one soon, maybe today or tomorrow. And we're going to be discussing the state examiner directives. Jonathan's going to be going over that. We have 2020-1, and then we also have 2020-2, which relates to townships. And then at the end, we'll have time for question and answers. So again, feel free to use the chat box. I think if you click on the more button, you can see the chat, and just make sure you are sending it to everyone. You can type in your question at the end, and then me or Jonathan can say your name. You can unmute yourself, and then you can show your video and ask your question. So in case you haven't had the chance to read the executive orders or all the memos, they are on our website. They are on the front page, and I have linked our website right here. So this is a snippet from Executive Order 20-04. There is a section on public meetings and open door law. So paragraph 3, it provides that you can suspend the requirements of explicitly adopting a policy for electronic participation in public meetings. And from this executive order, also suspended is the requirement on the minimum number of required people to attend a meeting. So per the order, a public meeting can take place with just one member of the governing body present, and the others can participate by electronic means. So that's suspending the requirement in Indiana Code 514-1.5-3.6, C, F, G, and H. So those sections of the statute that relates to the requirements relating to a governing body being able to participate in electronic meetings. Please note that in the executive order, it says that all other requirements of Indiana Code 514-1.5 remain in effect. So again, because I just wanted you to know the most important thing is to go to our website and look at these things. This is a screenshot of our front page. We have them sectioned off into Board of Accounts information. We have public access counselor, DLGF memos, and then we have the executive orders on there as well. And this is what the section of Board of Account memos looks like. So this is our first memo that we sent out regarding the coronavirus on March 12th. It's titled Policy Regarding Coronavirus. So this has a few things we wanted to specifically touch on. The The memo addresses creating policies on how the unit will address recent areas of concern, such as employee benefits and compensation, the current work environment, disruption of travel, just really just anything that involves the public health crisis. And first, I wanted to mention that with all things that might require changes or alterations to existing statutes or local policies, please consult with your attorney. And this memo is essentially urging governing bodies to work with their attorneys to develop a policy or policies specific to the public health emergency. So when developing your policies, you should have broad language that can reference more specific materials so that the policies don't have to keep on being constantly updated and approved. I know circumstances are changing so quickly that if you make your policy specific and changes are necessary, then you'll have to re-amend and then reapprove. So make your language broad enough so you don't have to take the time to do that. I know many communities have canceled all meetings, but please keep in mind that Indiana Code 514.1.5-5D does provide for conducting emergency meetings if necessary. So in that event, the time requirements for the posting don't apply, which is normally 48 hours. You do, though, have to give the media, the one that has requested notice of your meetings, you have to give them the same notice that you give the members of your board. And for schools, specifically on this call, please keep in mind that any collective bargaining agreements that you might have, any actions your governing body takes may impact the provisions in the contracts. So finally, regarding this memo, please note that the Board of Accounts, we won't take an audit exception to these policies and the resulting responses that are due to the coronavirus. And for those who are not auditors, audit exception, what that means in our report is that from what we inspected, everything was good except for these instances. So when we take exception to something, we write an audit finding and put that in your report. So essentially audit exceptions are undesirable or bad, and no exceptions are good. So when I say take audit exception, that means we will probably write a comment in the report. This is on the second memo that we sent out. We sent this one out on March 16th, and this one is titled Coronavirus Items to Consider. In it, we provide several suggestions and things that you should be considering. The first thing to know is that our guidance is not meant to be considered restrictive. So governmental bodies, they're going to need to monitor and address situations as quickly as possible. Things are very fluid and changing very fast. But remember, the situation issues we're facing right now are only temporary. Although we don't have a good feel on when we won't be in emergency conditions any longer, we know that this is going to pass and we'll get back to normal, hopefully in the short term. So the policies that your unit would be adopting and the actions they're going to be adopting, they should be in writing, and they should be designed to maintain operations to as close as normal as possible and with the well-being of the employees and the public in mind. I know normal seems like a long time ago, but governments still need to be open and providing at least some basic services. And all of that will require structured leadership from elected officials. So most of the questions that we've received, at least for me and Jonathan, were initially about payroll. And our recommendation of those kind of questions is to review any guidance that is provided by the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor has recommended that units review their leave policies and to ensure that they have increased in flexibility. If they do make changes to their leave policies, just give their employees more flexibility there. I linked a couple websites here. Department of Labor has a specific site on coronavirus, and they have a separate one regarding the pandemic. Those might be good resources for you. And then also with payroll, I'm sure many of you are already doing this, is determining what work can be done remotely and most often from their employee's home. Also, a determination on what has to be conducted at the government location should be made. So if you need to be doing certain function or certain activity, you may want to rank those in area of importance or something like that. Just make sure employees are on top of that. You should consider how employees will be paid in the event of a mandatory closing of the office or the building, or if someone has to be quarantined or isolated and can't do their job from home. You could consider trading days off. Perhaps some employees will work one day in the office while the other is going to work at home, and then they can switch. They could aid in getting tasks completed while also accomplishing the social distancing aspect. You could establish who makes the decisions at your unit on who works from home. Put a point person in charge on scheduling all of that. From our point of view, I'd like to stress that the unit should not overlook security. So with people working from home and taking things off site, what measures are you going to take to protect your accounting records, computer records, laptops, monitors, other assets? And then what if a person can't do their job from home? You'll need to consider how or even if to pay that employee. But from our perspective, just please know that at the Board of Accounts, we won't take exception to the extension of paid leave time that is in accordance with the allowable approved policies and provisions that your board approves. And one of the more important things that people forget in the moment when panic occurs is that you should be tracking your costs. Please keep good records on your costs. The more you track the COVID-19 expenses, the better chance you'll have at getting state or federal reimbursement in the future. It's possible that if you have costs that you can't support, you may not get as much or any of that reimbursed. So just try to track as much as you can. Moving on to the next memo. This memo is titled Assistance During COVID-19. So this addresses expenditures made by units to address economic burden incurred by the citizens and businesses alike from the public health emergency. So again, the Board of Accounts, we won't take audit exception as long as the executive orders are followed, policies are adopted in public meetings to approve the expenditures, and to make sure to document any legal opinions as well. We recommend that the policies adopted, within those policies, have a provision or some wording that explains what it's for, that it addresses the effects from the public health crisis itself. And moving on to the next memo. I know I'm going through all this pretty quick, but we'll have plenty of time for questions, I think. And Jonathan, Debbie, feel free to input any other information that you'd like. But moving on to the next memo, we sent this one out on April 3rd. This one is titled The Continuity of Essential Operations. This addresses how you should develop a plan to continue essential operations through a sustained period of absenteeism by employees or public officials. And in the memo, we have a list of questions you should be asking yourself, such as what will we do if key personnel are unable to work? You can consider rotating their duties, maybe teaching other employees to perform important functions. In this memo, we also provided a link to the FEMA Continuity Resource Toolkit, and that may be helpful as well. For townships specifically, they have a statute that requires that the trustee designate an individual to be their designee to perform the duties of the township trustee in the event that the township trustee is incapacitated. And that's just not during public health crises. This is just any time. Every trustee should have a designee. So for townships, just make sure your designee knows all the township processes, make sure they have access to the records, the bank account, and just they know what's going on at the township and what to do if you as the trustee can't continue working.
Chase, I was going to kind of add, when it comes to your designee, you might want to even have a backup plan or have considered someone that would be helpful to them. So in other words, if you have somebody from your governing board as your designee, you might want to have also another trustee who is familiar with the way that your particular operations work, if you are using a vendor or the manual forms that you're using.
Thanks. So going to this slide, this is a 2-page memo, and in this second page, it goes over some points that you should consider when developing those continuity policies. And again, we recommend you consult with your attorney as you develop your plan. But in the event that the fiscal officer is temporarily unable to perform duties in an order of succession to fill for the fiscal officer, we recommend that at least one of the individuals be outside of the government office, kind of like what Debbie was just mentioning, like a board, like a member of the board, just because if something happens at the office, there's someone outside that can come in and help run what's actually essential. We recommend providing the names, position, and the email of all designated individuals to the governing body and the attorney, just so they can be on the same page, have contact information, be able to contact somebody if they need to in the event of an emergency. And regarding delegation of authorities, we recommend that you work with your attorney again on developing a delegation of authority for each individual that you've designated to do a certain function in case someone else is unable to do their duties. These delegations themselves, we recommend that you forward those to the governing body and the attorney, as well as any bank representatives, your software vendors, and just others that you consider necessary, just so everyone's on the same page and they know who they should be calling. And if they don't answer, then the next person on the list can answer. And yeah, contact your bank representative directly. Provide them with those names. Provide the designated individuals with the names and contact information of the governing board, myself and Jonathan at the Board of Accounts, so you can ask us any questions. Contact information of the bank, just IT staff, anybody that you can think of that they will need to contact if they run into any issues. The associations, IASBO, the Township Association would be good to have those phone numbers handy. And you could provide a list of essential tasks to be performed, like processing payroll, claims, collections. You could provide access to written procedures and critical dates for like PERF, payroll taxes, health insurance, things like that. So this memo is essentially an ongoing document. It's some of the things that we thought of when we met that you should be asking yourselves. So any ideas that you have that you think we should share with the other government units, please let us know and we can send that out. So to conclude on the memos, before I turn it over to Jonathan, officials should keep monitoring their specific situations. Things are changing as we speak, like I said before. So it's to your advantage to keep on top of things and make changes as necessary. I said this many times, but please work with your attorney. From what we've discussed in the memos, they're our audit positions. So during an audit of your unit, that's the position that we would take, but it is not a legal opinion. So again, remember that, work with your attorneys and get opinions documented from your attorneys whenever possible. And then document as much as you can. I think when I trained with Ryan in the past, he probably said document 20, 30 times when we talked about internal controls. But this is a time that it's really, really important to do so, because, you know, as auditors, we love to have as much written documentation you can throw at us. But if you want reimbursement for these things, when the federal grants come out, you'll need to have documentation. Just make sure what you actually document is the intent, the actions you take, and the policies that you've made, that the governing bodies have approved. Make sure they're in writing and they're as clear as possible. And that'll help us both down the road when audit time comes. So with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan to talk about the newly issued directives. And you can just tell me when you want me to move the slide, Jonathan.
Okay, Chase. Thank you. I'm going to be discussing 2 state examiner directives that have been issued by State Examiner Paul Joyce. The first directive, 2020-1, it was issued on March 19th of 2020, and it addresses alternative procedures that State Board of Accounts will not take audit exception to during the public health emergency related to timely deposit of funds and also the approval of claims. Next slide, Chase. As all of us know, IC 5136-1 requires funds to be deposited within the next business day once the total reaches $500. That law is still in effect. However, during the period of public health emergency, the State Board of Accounts will not take audit exception if the governing board approves the frequency for deposit of public funds to be limited to 2 times per week. I do want to note that this does not apply to township trustees, because per IC 51361C, it states the public funds collected by township trustees shall be deposited in the designated depository on or before the 1st and 15th day of each month. There should be a few specifics that need to be addressed in your policy. First, the school board should specifically state that the frequency of deposits may be limited to 2 times per week. The policy should direct that the deposits be made on Tuesdays and Thursdays so as to limit the amount of cash that's on hand in your office. However, if those days do not work, we also realize banks are also cutting some hours. So if it happens that your bank is not open on those days, you can adjust those days that you deposit. You just want to try and keep them separated only by a couple days to limit the liability. So, and then also on the days when a deposit is not made, the cash on hand should be secured in a safe. If you do not have a safe, then you can use like a locked cabinet or a locked office, but you will need to weigh the amount of security you have available with the amount of money you have on hand and how much risk you're comfortable with. Having these processes documented and in place will allow your school corporation to maintain structure and order during the emergency. Next slide, please. Indiana Code 511.10.1.6, it governs the approval of claims, including the required approval of the school board. This law is still in effect. However, during the public health emergency, we're not going to take audit exception if the governing body chooses to use the following procedures. First, the governing body may designate one of its members to approve claims for payment in advance of board allowance. You will need to document this and how it is to be accomplished. For example, in this time of quarantine and social distancing, the school board may authorize the fiscal officer to electronically send a list of claims to the school board member for approval. And that approval would be documented through a return email to the fiscal officer. Any claims which are not approved would be separately listed in the return email. If this procedure is adopted, the board must allow those claims at its first meeting after the public health emergency has been lifted. Next slide, please. The second directive I'm going to be discussing is Directive 2020-2. It was issued on March 20th of 2020. This directive provides guidance to adjust the normal procedures for completing and documenting the TA1 and the TA1B with the State Board of Accounts without us taking audit exception. Of course, the TA1 is the Township Assistance Application, and then the TA1B is the application for additional or continuing township assistance. Next slide, please. During this time of the public health emergency, trustees may need to adjust their normal procedures used to complete and document the application for township assistance and the application for additional or continuing township assistance. IC 1220 governs township assistance and is still in effect during the public health emergency. However, SBOA will not take exception to the trustee or designated deputy assisting the applicant in the completion of these forms by telephone or other digital methods. Next slide, please. The State Board of Accounts will not take exception to the alternative procedures. If the applicant cannot provide a signature or electronic confirmation that the applicant has read the notice of public law or the affidavit, the township trustee or designated deputy may read the notice of public law and the affidavit to the applicant by telephone. The township trustee or designated deputy must indicate on the signature of applicant line that they read the notice of public law and the affidavit by telephone and affix his or her signature to the statement. Next slide, please, Chase. SBOA will not take audit exception if the applicant cannot provide a signature or electronic confirmation of the certification required in the affidavit section. If the township trustee or designated deputy reads the affidavit to the applicant by telephone, the trustee or designated deputy must receive an affirmative answer from the applicant for each certification contained in the affidavit section. The township trustee or designated deputy must indicate on the signature or applicant line that the applicant affirmed each statement contained in the affidavit to them by telephone. The trustee and deputy then should also fix his or her signature to the statement. Next slide, please. This directive will be rescinded upon declaration by the governor that the public health emergency has ended. So these procedures will only be in place during the public health emergency. Next slide, please, Chase. The Indiana Township Association proposed a modified township assistance application to be used during the public health emergency, which we have approved. This form may only be used during the time from which the public health emergency exists. And I have included a link where the township assistance application may be downloaded from. If you're bored at home right now, now's a great time that you can get an audit. Our field examiners are set up to be able to continue to work. If your local unit of government has the capability to scan and upload to Gateway all documentation that we would need to support an audit, we are opening up the request line. I want to emphasize that you must be able to scan and upload all the documentation needed and requested. However, I also want to note if trustees have manual records and they are uncomfortable with moving the records to a place where they can scan, we'll pick up the records from their home using safe measures to scan and then return the records back home. If you wish to request an audit that will be done 100% remotely, you can send us an email with your contact information and your unit name to communications@sboa.in.gov. Once again, the email address is communications@sboa.in.gov. We will consider these requests received on a first come, first served basis. Also, I just want you to be aware that before we open up for questions, I want to inform you that a memo is going to be sent out in the near future on the utilization of Indiana Code 36184 and that governs the temporary transfer of funds. As we have heard concerns on possible cash flow issues due to the June tax settlement, this memo will lay out the statutory provisions which allow for the fiscal body to make temporary transfers for cash flow purposes. Once again, here's our contact information. Probably the best way to get a hold of us is schools.townships@sboa.in.gov. And currently we're pretty up to date on our emails. So hopefully we can return responses to you within no later than a couple days if you send us an email. So I appreciate it, all of your time, and I think we're ready to open up for some questions.
I've already received a couple questions sent to me. It looks like privately, a couple of them. I see Paul is in here. He might want to answer some of these. But Debbie might know. There's one that after an audit that is going on now, before the paperwork is returned, how will the paperwork be cleaned before returning it to the township? We can table that one, or?
Yeah, I think we want to do everything in a safe way so that there's no exposure. So before we would undertake either accepting records or providing them back, we need to get those logistics figured out, and we will. And if there's not a way to do it in a safe manner, then we will take that off the table as a method of doing it. But I do believe that there is one, and we need to look to the health professionals to make sure that we're following the right procedure.
Thanks, Debbie. There's one question from a township that is asking if she can take over for her in the event that she cannot perform her duties, and she wants to pay me for it. I believe you can be the designee for another township, but I can't remember off the top of my head if pay would be allowed or not. If you would like to email us, we can look at that statute and then we can send that to you.
Yes, and I believe that there's through an interlocal agreement, and that's probably what it would take, that you could do that. And again, as Chase has stressed, we do need to confer with your attorney as well, but we will look into that and get you an answer.
Give another question, same thing. I don't think the designee needs to reside within the township. So that's that question. Must employees use up their sick time and vacation time before we pay them for days off? And I believe the answer to that would be no.
There would have to be an adopted policy approved by the governing body.
Yeah, so your current policies, you just need to review them and then just determine if you want to reduce the restrictions, make it more flexible, things like that. But I don't think there's any requirement where they have to use up sick days or vacation days to be eligible. I think on those Department of Labor websites, they have the CARE Act outlined and the different types of leave. And there's different, like if you, Paul explained it well one day, but there's different requirements for each types and the limits that you can take. So if you go to that website, there's a lot of information there for you. Jonathan, did you receive any calls or questions sent to you?
I see a question in here. Will we be giving any guidance as to what fund or account the federal fund should be deposited into? We will have to work with DOE as to what funds they would, if they want to establish a specific fund rather than one of the just other federal funds. So we will have to discuss that with DOE.
I think they reached out to us last week, so there already are discussions going on. So we should be sending at least in the bulletin, those new accounts if they are added.
See one from earlier on that we might have missed. Didn't Executive Order 20-09 Section 4 waive the requirement for any member to be physically present? Quote, suspend the requirement to have any members be physically present for meetings deemed to be essential.
As Chase moves the slide back, I did look at that, and you are correct that it did suspend that. And then the Q&A from the public access counselor also specifically states that it suspends the requirement to have any members physically present for public meeting for the duration of COVID-19. So as we were saying, it definitely, how do we say, things are fluid, but that is in the Q&A that's given by the public access counselor that is referring to 20-09 specifically.
Does anyone have any other questions? They can speak up now or type in the chat.
I think there's a few others in the chat box. Is it helpful if I read those to you?
Sure, that might be helpful.
Okay. SBOA received all of my records for an audit just before this crisis began. I assume that when the audit is completed, they will call or email me. Am I correct?
Yes, they should be contacting you to schedule an exit conference once they're finished.
Can the trustee be considered a member of the governing body in order to adhere to the requirement of one member be present for a board meeting, which I think we just said is not necessary.
Yes, that is not necessary.
Oh, I just lost the chat. Our school corp has requested an early draw of available appropriate local taxes due to the school corp. Our local official has denied request until after May 1st. Is their position acceptable?
Our local official has denied the request. Looks like you want to say something, Debbie.
You're
It looks
muted,
like you're
Debbie.
muted. Hold on, I'll unmute
No, I'm
you.
good. I'm good.
You're unmuted.
Could you read the question again? I want to make sure I understand.
Yes, it says our school corp.
Go ahead, John.
It says our school corp appropriate local taxes official has denied the request until after May 1st.
Okay, so I'm assuming that's from that's a tax advance. Are we talking about? I'm not sure exactly what we're in reference to. That's what I'm assuming. It sounds like maybe that person who had that question maybe send us an email directly so that we can get the detail that we need, unless Chase idea on it.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
I think that'd be good.
May not be me.
We are not allowing any school personnel.
We are.
Oh, go ahead, Jonathan. I'm sorry. I'll let you read.
We are not allowing any school personnel in our buildings until after 4/20/20. Is that not considered a timely deposit? I don't know from that standpoint, if the school's closed, I don't know what collections the ECA would be collecting with the school being closed.
So if we're talking that that things have been mailed in, perhaps, then from a daily deposit law, you haven't really received it until you get deposit. And so the big thing there would that it's secure, that whatever mail is getting in is not in a place where somebody could come and take those checks that are being mailed in. But from a daily deposit law perspective, we wouldn't take exception until you are actually physically able to make the deposit. Does that answer the question?
I think so, Debbie. Yes. The next question, somebody stating that they are not getting the SBOA memos. How can I join the listserv? Provide us your email address and your unit, and we can get you added to those lists if you are not on those lists.
Yeah, that's important to keep those updated, because what we use is what we have in FlexGen, which is from our last audit, which for townships may be several years ago. And then our secondary resource is Gateway. So if we don't have your contact information, it's probably being sent to the last person that filed the annual financial report. So if you have anything newer than that, please let us know.
We have a question. It says, I pay my cemetery mower and fire contract by check. Is this still acceptable? I believe that's still acceptable. There's statute on that doesn't allow for cash disbursements. So I don't know what other method of paying that the township would be able to do there.
I have a question. Yeah, I'm township trustee, and are we still required to get all the information from the client that is required during this time? Like, you know, the bills and the stuff like that, that they have to prove to us that they qualify? Okay.
Yes, I can. What I can do is I can open this shorter township assistance application, and you are still required to make a reasonable effort to attain the documents so you can determine what their level of financial status is, I guess. Where do you have that link, Jeff? Here it is.
Yeah.
I will share my screen once I have it on. So stop share. You can go on to the next question.
And it doesn't ask for all the information that the other.
Yes, it's a modified application, and we have, for the time while we're under the public health emergency, that information is acceptable.
Okay.
To provide services.
So can you see this, Jonathan?
I just see your screen.
The memo?
No, I just see your.
Oh, here we go. Do you see this now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is a modified application we have linked on the website. This was developed by the ITA, the Township Association, so thank you for that. You can download it by clicking here.
Oh,
As you can see, it's a lot shorter than what it was.
Yes.
But there are questions about what other income sources do they have, what other family members, the amounts, the current recent employers, the signatures, the affidavit, and the consent to this information that you will be verifying, I guess. So it's a lot less than what it normally is.
I've lost the chat box, so let me get it back. Okay. When passing a resolution by voice vote via teleconference, can trustees sign for board members and/or affix a signed certification.
Sounds more like a public access counselor question, but as long as you have record of them saying aye, or you see them writing it down in a meeting and you document that, I don't think we would take audit exception to that. Debbie might want to throw more in there, but from our perspective, that'd be okay.
Right, yeah. But for absolute assurance of what you need to be doing during this time, do contact the public access counselor, or look in their Q&As. We do have on our website a link to their Q&As, but you could also go to their website as well.
So Chase, if we're doing Zoom meetings with our board members and they've okayed all of the resolutions, I am just sending that resolution to each of them to sign. Is that appropriate enough?
I think that would be good, and they would just either scan it in or email it back, right?
They're just sending it back to me.
Yeah, for audit purposes, I think that'd be fine. But again, check with a public access counselor or look at their memos online.
We have one here. A review/audit had begun prior to the declaration of the national emergency. However, the review continues. Further, I have reduced employee hours and our requests for assistance have increased dramatically. I am being asked from the SBOA for additional documentation information to complete review. My office is having a hard time adhering to the new requests and also to the governor's order. In addition, gathering documentation for review. Is the SBOA taking into account the unprecedented circumstances which we find ourselves in when asking officials to comply with review or audit requirements?
Yes, we are. And we do understand that you are having things that you have to work around as well. And so if you are encountering that a situation where you think that you're being pressed too hard, I would ask that you would go ahead and contact either Chase or Jonathan, and we can help you work through that, because we'll contact the field examiner and find out what specifically that they're requesting, if there might be another method or another means to get that information. They're new at this too. The field examiners are, a lot of them, and so they're trying hard to be accommodating, but sometimes they don't know all of the available ways to be accommodating. And so we want to work with you. We don't want to stop the audit. We want to make progress. But if there's impediments to that where we can't, then we will work around that as well, you know, even if that causes a delay. So please contact us so that we can work with you on that. Okay.
Next question, will there be any leeway on the monthly engagement uploads required by schools, particularly ECA reports? Yes, we will not take audit exception if the monthly uploads for the ECAs are not in by the 15th. It's basically about 45 days, but as soon as things get back to normal, if you can get those uploaded as quickly as possible, that would be great.
Hey, Chase, I want to comment on that.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you, Paul.
There's a lot of government units that turned the key, locked the door, and walked out of it. I can tell you, I think that's the wrong approach. Everybody needs to remember your work has to go on. And I mean, the government has to run. So we can't just lock the key, walk out the door, and expect that anything is going to get done. And, you know, I think that's actually happened in quite a few units of government. I think what you need to do is look at processes and procedures that you can do or your employees can do while you're paying them in most cases, not where they're at work. And there are ways to do it. And I can tell you that I have 269 people that work for me and work for the Board of Accounts. Every one of them is out there working, and every one of them is doing a functional job during the day. And, you know, you just have to find how you can do that. And, you know, I saw the question about, you know, like, you know, your schools are closed, so your ECA treasurers can't go in there, which I understand that. And of course, they're not opening the mail, so they're not collecting cash, so you don't have a daily deposit unless cash is being collected from somewhere else, which I doubt during this that's going on. But you know, it's when you don't do it now, you're still going to be expected to upload those forms, so somebody's going to have to do it. And those statements can usually be uploaded by that ECA treasurer wherever they're at. So try to look at your processes and procedures and see if people can do it in an alternative way. That'd be all.
Thanks, Paul. Does SBOA know if any delay, postponement, or other changes will apply for those townships that would be required to do capital plans this year? I don't know if there's been a change in the date for that or not. Does anybody?
I believe that you will find in the near future that will be delayed.
Okay.
Probably until next year.
I think that is all of the questions we
Okay.
have in the chat, but I want to offer an opportunity if anybody wants to unmute their mic, or is still typing, we'll hang in for a minute or two and let you do that.
I think we just had one come in. Our computer software has also provided documents for township assistance. Is this acceptable? I would compare it to what we have approved in the application, in the modified application. And if it has those same requirements, I would think that would be acceptable. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
We have a bulletin article out there on form approvals and modifications to the form, so I'd recommend you take a look at that bulletin article. It should be similar or an exact replica, and if not, then if any changes from the prescribed form, then you can just document that on a list. When our field examiners come in, you can provide them that list, and they can review those forms at that time, and then they'll be approving the forms if there's any modifications.
Jonathan, or Chase, will you share the screen with your contact information again? And I
Yes.
see, you know, there's a lot of mention about, there's several resources out there. So Indiana Township Association, Debbie Driscoll has sent out a lot of information on remote access and online applications. So please check that out. And also the public access counselor memos we've mentioned a few times. That's really important to go to the public access counselor website, read through those, and if you still have questions, to contact them.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. I think she might even be in here. I see your name.
She is. So I wanted to take an opportunity, you know, I'll thank everyone again. If you guys send in a question while I'm talking, we can still circle back and get that. But I really appreciate the State Board of Accounts coming together and working with us on this webinar, as well as the local government associations, in particular today, the Indiana Township Association and the Indiana School Board Association. I do apologize for all the tech issues that we had with registration. I know people had all sorts of different times and on their confirmations, and I'm not sure what happened with our system, so I apologize for that. We have been recording it, and I will have that available on our website, cdext.purdue.edu/OLG COVID-19. I also will be sending that out to everyone, and I believe the SBOA is going to post it on their website as well, so you'll have access to that. While I was speaking, there's one more question that came in. Jonathan, do you want to read it?
Sure. Will the stimulus money be viewed as income in assessing applicant eligibility for township assistance? Can township boards adopt language in township assistance eligibility standards that determines how stimulus monies are viewed in the applicant qualification process, specifically whether to count or not count the monies?
That's a good question. Sean, if you email, Debbie looks like she wants to say something.
Well, and I think you were going to say email that question in.
Yeah.
Because there may be guidance from the federal government as far as how stimulus money is to be treated anyway. You have to remember that stimulus money is actually an advance on 2020 taxes and the liability of the tax. And so from that perspective, it's not income. And this is just from my reading of it. That also means what they have said is if you have no tax liability, that doesn't mean that you repay any of that money to the federal government. So we'll have to look into that specific kind of question. But from my understanding, it will not be viewed as income as much as a credit against liability on your taxes. So.
Okay, well, Debbie, Chase, Jonathan, and Paul, I want to thank you again for joining us today, and thank you everyone else for joining in.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
My
Stay
pleasure.
safe,
And
everybody.
remember what they said early on. They're open for business, so give them a call.
Yes, we are here.